Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at some excerpts from Imam Ghazali's book on the proprieties of the student. And, this is a book which is not just for students in like the academic sense, but really anyone who's on a journey or a quest for knowledge and personal growth.
It is interesting how Ghazali, even back then, framed knowledge as a form of worship, a spiritual journey.
Yeah, it definitely adds like a whole other layer to it. So he outlines 10 duties for the student, and I gotta say, I'm pretty curious about this idea of purifying the soul. It sounds intense.
It is. He compares it to the physical cleanliness that's required for prayer. Like you wouldn't pray in soiled clothes.
Right.
He's basically saying you shouldn't seek knowledge with a soiled soul.
Okay.
He paints this really vivid image of the heart as a house for angels.
Oh, interesting. So what exactly are these angels, metaphorically speaking?
Think of them as like the positive qualities that help with learning, like clarity or focus or receptivity. But Ghazali warns us that negative traits like anger and envy, they're like barking dogs.
Okay.
They scare those angels away.
So it's not just about avoiding like bad behavior, but you're saying it's about really cultivating the right inner environment for knowledge to flourish. That makes you think, what are the barking dogs in like our modern lives? What might be hindering our ability to learn? Maybe it's that like constant barrage of notifications.
Oh, yes.
Or the pressure to multitask.
Sure.
Or even that nagging self-doubt.
Absolutely. Ghazali would probably argue that our endless scroll through social media is like a whole pack of wild dogs.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
He actually brings up minimizing worldly ties as the second duty of the student.
I can see how that totally ties in with the first duty. Like if we're constantly distracted, our attention is all fragmented, like a stream splitting into a dozen different rivulets. You can't really absorb the knowledge that you're seeking.
He uses that exact analogy of the stream.
Wow.
And, in today's world, we're just bombarded with information from every direction. It's so easy to get caught up in the current and lose sight of our learning goals.
Do you think that Ghazali would suggest something, a digital detox? Like actually stepping away from the noise to reconnect with that inner clarity?
It's definitely in line with his philosophy. He talks about approaching learning with intentionality and focus and presence.
That reminds me of something else that he talks about, which is humility before the teacher, the third duty.
Right.
It's not just about showing respect, but it's about recognizing that wisdom can come from unexpected sources.
He illustrates this with a really nice story of Ibn Abbas, who's a renowned scholar, holding the stirrup for Zayd ibn Thabit, who is another scholar.
Wow.
It just shows that the true seekers of knowledge, they prioritize wisdom above ego or social status.
It's like saying, leave your pride at the door because the real prize is the knowledge itself.
Exactly. Ghazali encourages us to be open to learning from anybody, regardless of their background or position. It challenges us to ask ourselves, are we truly seeking knowledge, or are we more concerned with appearing knowledgeable?
Right. And that makes me wonder about the different types of knowledge that Ghazali talks about. He seems to suggest a hierarchy, with some sciences being more noble than others.
That's right. He categorizes sciences based on their fruits and their authenticity.
Okay.
While he acknowledges the importance of practical knowledge, like medicine and law, he ultimately points to something that he calls the noblest science.
And what is that exactly?
Knowing God.
Okay, that's pretty profound. What does he mean by knowing God in this context?
It's not just about intellectual understanding or like religious dogma.
Right.
Ghazali describes it as a transformative experience, a direct connection with the divine that leads to deep inner peace and fulfillment.
I'm imagining it's not something that you can just read about in a textbook.
No. He shares this really interesting anecdote about two wise men whose portraits were found in a mosque. One man emphasizes knowing God is the ultimate cause of everything.
Okay.
The very philosophical approach.
And the other?
His perspective is more experiential.
Okay.
He describes a profound inner transformation, a shift from constantly seeking to a state of complete contentment in knowing God. It's less about the intellectual pursuit and more about inner awakening.
That makes you think. How does our current learning path connect to this ultimate goal of self-knowledge and connection with something greater than ourselves? Is it through exploring spirituality directly, through studying philosophy or history, or maybe even through creative expression like art or music?
Ghazali seems to suggest that any pursuit of knowledge, if approached with the right intention, can ultimately lead us closer to this understanding. It's like all paths, if followed with sincerity, they eventually converge on the same mountaintop.
I love that analogy. So where do we go from here? Ghazali mentions 10 duties in total, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Well, before we jump ahead, I think it's worth exploring how he connects these seemingly disparate fields of knowledge.
Okay.
Because he doesn't see them as isolated disciplines, but as interconnected parts of a larger whole.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into that.
Okay, let's take medicine and jurisprudence, for example.
Mm-hmm.
He argues that both are essential for maintaining the well-being of the vehicle,
Okay.
by which he means our physical bodies and the society we live in.
So medicine helps maintain harmony within our bodies, while jurisprudence or law helps maintain harmony in society. But ultimately, they're both serving a higher purpose.
Exactly. Ghazali even uses a clever analogy. He says that someone who studies medicine or law but doesn't work on their inner self is like someone who packs for a pilgrimage but never actually sets out on the journey.
They're focused on the logistics, the preparation, but missing the whole point of the trip. It's like buying all the fancy camping gear but never actually going camping.
Precisely. And this brings us back to the importance of intention. Ghazali encourages us to constantly ask ourselves, why am I learning this?
Right.
How does it fit into my overall goals?
Right, because knowledge for knowledge's sake is one thing, but Ghazali's urging us to use knowledge as a tool for personal transformation. It's like he's giving us a roadmap, not just for acquiring information, but for using it to evolve as human beings.
That's a brilliant way to put it.
Yeah.
And, Ghazali doesn't shy away from addressing the skeptics. He acknowledges that some people might dismiss certain fields of knowledge because they've seen inconsistencies or disagreements among experts.
Like those who give up on philosophy or theology because they think, if these scholars can't agree, maybe it's all just a bunch of speculation.
Exactly. But Ghazali cautions against this kind of thinking. He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, don't reject truth because of the people who hold it. Seek the truth first, and then you'll know who his true advocates are.
It's like saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater just because some folks are misusing it. Find what resonates with you and focus on that.
He's encouraging us to think critically and not just accept things blindly, even if it comes from authority figures.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have to ask about this mysterious science of revelation that Ghazali keeps hinting at. He calls it a precious jewel, a pearl of inestimable worth. What exactly is he talking about?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Well, Ghazali describes it as knowledge that removes the veil from our hearts, and it allows us to directly experience the divine. He uses all these rich metaphors talking about glimpsing the unseen world and tasting the sweetness of true faith.
So it's not just like an intellectual understanding of God, it's like a deeply personal, even mystical experience.
Exactly. He compares it to a hidden treasure. It's not something that you can fully grasp through logic or reason alone.
Right.
It has to be discovered through inner exploration and spiritual practice.
It almost sounds like falling in love. You can read all the poetry in the world about it, but until you experience it firsthand, you can't truly understand its depth.
That's a great analogy. And like falling in love, Ghazali suggests that this knowledge can be transformative. Like it can change your whole perspective and your priorities in really profound ways.
That brings us back to his 10 duties for the student. We were just talking about his emphasis on minimizing worldly ties and cultivating inner purity.
Right.
Do you think those are prerequisites for accessing this science of revelation?
He definitely sees them as foundational. Remember the analogy of the heart as a house for angels? Ghazali believes that when we clear away the barking dogs of negative traits and distractions, we create the inner space for this higher knowledge to take root.
So it's like we're preparing the soil, creating the right conditions for this precious seed to germinate and grow.
Exactly. And he doesn't just stop at individual purification. Remember how he compares medicine and jurisprudence to maintaining the well-being of the vehicle?
Right.
That's also part of the preparation.
So caring for our physical health and contributing to a just society are also important steps on this path to spiritual knowledge.
Absolutely. Ghazali believed that our outer actions and our inner state are totally interconnected.
Yeah.
He takes that pilgrimage analogy even further and says that those who obsess over the technicalities of law without working on their inner selves are like someone who meticulously stitches a water skin for the journey, but then they never set out.
They're so focused on the details that they miss the whole point of the pilgrimage. It's like you were saying before, like buying all the fancy camping gear, but never actually going camping.
Precisely. And this brings us back to the importance of intention.
Right.
Ghazali encourages us to constantly ask, Why am I learning this? How does it connect to my ultimate goal?
So it's not just about acquiring knowledge for the sake of it or for worldly success, but for something deeper, more meaningful.
He even suggests that our pursuit of knowledge can actually become a form of worship if it's directed towards understanding ourselves and our connection to the divine.
It's like he's saying that knowledge can be a bridge between the seen and the unseen, between our human experience and something greater than ourselves.
And that's a powerful idea, isn't it? It elevates learning beyond just a purely intellectual pursuit. It transforms it into a journey of self-discovery and spiritual growth.
But how do we reconcile this idea of a hierarchy of knowledge with the fact that Ghazali also encourages us to be open to learning from such diverse sources? It seems like kind of a paradox.
That's a great question. And it's a tension that Ghazali himself grapples with. While he clearly believes that some forms of knowledge are more profound and transformative than others, he also emphasizes the importance of seeking wisdom wherever it can be found.
So it's not about rejecting certain fields of knowledge outright, but rather recognizing that they might serve different purposes on our learning journey.
I think that's a nuanced and helpful way to look at it. He's not saying we should abandon our study of medicine or law or philosophy, but rather to consider how those pursuits can support our overall spiritual growth.
So it's like we're building a house. We need different types of materials and tools, the walls, the roof. They each serve a specific function, but ultimately they all contribute to creating a beautiful and functional dwelling.
That's a wonderful analogy.
Yeah.
And Ghazali even provides a framework for understanding this hierarchy of knowledge in a really practical way.
Okay.
Remember how we were talking about the science of revelation as a hidden treasure?
Yes, the idea that it can't be accessed through logic alone, but requires inner purification and spiritual practice.
Well, Ghazali uses another powerful analogy to explain how all these different types of knowledge can lead us towards this ultimate goal. He compares it to the pilgrimage, the Hajj.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
He describes 3 stages of the learning journey, each mirroring a different aspect of the pilgrimage.
So what's the first stage?
Preparation. This is like taking care of our physical needs and worldly affairs. Ghazali uses examples like medicine, jurisprudence, and even just basic survival skills.
Okay.
It's about ensuring the well-being of the vehicle,
Right.
our body, and our place in society so we can embark on the journey in the first place.
So it's not that these fields are unimportant, but they're seen as the foundation, the groundwork we need to lay before we can move towards something deeper.
Exactly. And then comes the second stage, the journey itself.
Okay, what does that entail?
This is where the inner work begins. Ghazali compares it to crossing the desert on the way to Mecca.
Okay.
It's about confronting our inner demons, purifying our intentions, and developing virtues like patience, humility, and gratitude.
It sounds like this is where the barking dogs come into play.
Right.
We have to face those negative traits head on and overcome them if we want to continue on the path.
Precisely. And it's not easy. Ghazali acknowledges that this stage requires effort, discipline, and a willingness to confront our own shortcomings.
But the reward is worth it, right? Because
Yeah.
ultimately this inner journey leads us to the final destination.
Exactly. The third stage, the pilgrimage itself, is the culmination of all our efforts. It's about reaching the Kaaba, the holiest site in Islam. And for Ghazali, this symbolizes attaining spiritual enlightenment, that direct experience of the divine that he calls the science of revelation.
It's like all the preparation, the purification, the challenges along the way have been leading us to this moment of profound connection.
And that's the beauty of Ghazali's framework. It connects seemingly disparate fields of knowledge, from medicine to law to theology, and shows how they can all play a role in our spiritual development.
It's like he's saying, don't just be a student of books, be a student of life.
I love that. And,
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, where are we on our own personal pilgrimages? Are we still packing our bags, or have we taken those first steps into the desert? And what challenges do we need to overcome to reach that ultimate destination?
It's definitely a lot to ponder, and that's what makes Ghazali's work so relevant even today. He's not just giving us information, he's inviting us to embark on a journey of self-discovery and transformation.
And, he doesn't just leave us with this theoretical framework.
Right.
He also offers some practical advice for navigating this path.
I'm curious about that. What kind of practical advice does he give?
Well, one of the things he emphasizes is the importance of choosing the right teacher. One of the things he emphasizes is the importance of choosing the right teacher.
Choosing the right teacher, that sounds pretty crucial, especially on a journey as important as this.
He compares it to choosing a doctor. You wouldn't just trust your physical health to anybody, would you?
Right.
You would seek out somebody who's knowledgeable and experienced and trustworthy. Ghazali says finding a spiritual guide is even more critical.
So what qualities should we look for in a teacher on this path?
Well, Ghazali emphasizes a few key traits. First and foremost, the teacher should embody the knowledge that they impart. They should walk the talk, so to speak.
It's like that saying, don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. Actions speak louder than words.
Exactly. And Ghazali warns against teachers who are more concerned with worldly recognition or material gain than with genuine spiritual guidance. He also emphasizes humility and compassion.
So they should be approachable, not intimidating, willing to meet students where they are on their journey.
Precisely. Ghazali stresses that a true teacher should nurture their students' growth with patience and understanding, not with judgment or harshness.
That makes you wonder if he would have some pretty strong opinions about certain teaching styles that we see today.
Yeah.
You know, the ones that prioritize rote memorization or competition over genuine understanding and personal growth?
It's an interesting thought. Ghazali definitely valued a more holistic approach to education, one that nourished not just the mind, but also the heart and the soul. He saw learning as a transformative process, not just a means to an end.
That reminds me of something we touched upon earlier. You mentioned that Ghazali doesn't shy away from addressing the skeptics.
Right.
What about those who might dismiss this whole idea of a science of revelation as being too subjective or unverifiable?
Well, he acknowledges that this kind of knowledge can't be proven empirically in the same way that, say, scientific theories can.
Right.
But he argues that it's no less real or valuable for that. He compares it to the experience of taste.
Okay.
Like, you can't describe the sweetness of honey to someone who's never tasted it.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the sweetness doesn't exist.
It's like saying you have to experience it for yourself to truly understand.
Exactly. And he encourages those who are skeptical to approach the search for knowledge with an open mind and a willingness to explore beyond the limits of logic and reason. He reminds us that there are many ways of knowing.
Right.
That intuition, personal experience, spiritual insight can be just as valid as empirical evidence.
I'm curious, do you think that Ghazali would have anything to say about how we approach learning in our modern world with this emphasis on technology and information overload?
He would probably caution us against mistaking information for knowledge. He might say that just because we have access to this vast sea of data,
Right.
that doesn't mean we're actually absorbing it or integrating it in a meaningful way. He might encourage us to be more discerning in our consumption of information, to prioritize depth over breadth.
So it's not about how much we know, but how deeply we understand and apply what we know.
Precisely. And he might also remind us of the importance of balance, finding time for quiet reflection and contemplation amidst the constant buzz of the digital world.
Yeah, I think that's a message that really resonates deeply today. We're so bombarded with stimuli that it's easy to lose touch with that inner stillness, that space where true understanding can emerge.
And I think Ghazali would also emphasize the importance of connecting our learning to a sense of purpose. He believed that knowledge should ultimately lead us towards self-knowledge, understanding our place in the grand scheme of things, and cultivating a deeper connection with the divine.
It's like he's saying, don't just learn to acquire information, learn to become a better human being.
Beautifully put. And, that's what makes Ghazali's work so timeless and relevant. He's not just offering a set of rules for students. He's outlining a path for personal and spiritual growth that's as relevant today as it was centuries ago.
Yeah, it's been an incredibly insightful deep dive. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on what it means to be a student, not just in the academic sense, but in that broader sense of being a lifelong learner on a journey of self-discovery. What's one key takeaway that you hope listeners will walk away with?
I would say this. Knowledge is a powerful tool, but it's only truly transformative when it's guided by intention, by humility, and a deep desire for understanding, both of ourselves and the world around us.
That's beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought from Ghazali himself. He writes, "Knowledge is the worship of the heart." So as you continue on your own learning journeys, ask yourselves, how can you make your pursuit of knowledge a more heart-centered endeavor, a path that leads not just to intellectual enrichment, but also to spiritual growth and inner peace? Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
On the Etiquette of the Student by Imam Ghazali. The formal proprieties and duties of the student are many but may be classified under 10 headings. The first duty of the student is to purify his soul from impure traits and blameworthy characteristics, because knowledge is the worship of man's heart as well as the prayer of his inmost self, sir, and the oblation of his inward being before God. Just as prayer, which is the duty of the physical senses, is not fulfilled unless the physical body has been purified from excrements and impurities, so is the worship of the inward being as well as the reformation of the heart. They are not fulfilled through knowledge unless they first be cleansed from impurities and uncleanliness. Thus, the prophet said, "Religion has been built on cleanliness." This is true physically and spiritually. God said, "Verily the polytheists are unclean," as a reminder to the mind that purity and uncleanliness are not confined to the externals which are perceived by the senses. Thus, the polytheist may be physically clean and immaculately dressed yet inwardly unclean, i.e., his inward being reeks with impurities. Uncleanliness is a word that represents that which is avoided and from which people desire to stay away. It is more important to avoid the impurities of the heart than to avoid physical impurities because, besides their abomination in this world, the impurities of the heart are fatal in the world to come. For this reason, the prophet said, "The angels do not enter into a house where there are dogs or images." The heart is the house of the angels, the place on which they descend and in which they abide, while bad traits like anger, lust, rancor, envy, pride, conceit, and the like are barking dogs. How then could the angels enter the heart when it is crowded with dogs? Besides, the light of knowledge is not made to shine upon the heart of man except through the instrumentality of the angels, and it is not possible for any man to have any communication with God except through revelation, a veil, or a messenger whom God sends and instructs to declare his will. Similarly, whatever knowledge is sent by the grace of God to the human heart is transmitted by the angels who have been entrusted, Muwakkalin, with this responsibility. They are the angels who have been made holy, pure, and free from all blameworthy traits. They attend to no one but the good, and with what they possess of the mercy of God, they reform no one but the pure. I do not say that, in the above-quoted tradition, the word house itself means heart, and the word dog means anger, or other blameworthy traits, but I do say that it is a suggestion. Thus, there is a difference between ignoring the literal meaning of words in favor of an esoteric interpretation on the one hand and incidentally pointing out an esoteric significance while affirming the literal meaning on the other hand. This subtle point is exactly what distinguishes the Badanites from the true believers. This is the method of suggestion, which is the way of the learned and the righteous. For suggestion means that what has already been mentioned should also represent something else, and consequently, attention should be paid to both. Thus, the wise man may witness a calamity befall someone besides himself, and the calamity would serve as a warning to him, waking him up to the fact that he too is subject to calamities and that time is full of vicissitudes. Thus, to turn one's attention from the examination of the affairs of others to those of his own, and from those of his own to the examination of the nature of things for the sake of learning, is a praiseworthy practice. Proceed, therefore, from the consideration of the house built by God and from the consideration of the dog which has been pronounced blameworthy, not for its physical appearance but for its inherent beastly characteristics and uncleanliness, to that of the animal spirit which represents bestiality. You should know, too, that he whose heart is saturated with anger, greed, indulgence, and readiness to slander people is actually a beast, although he appears in the form of a human being. He who has keen insight regards the real meaning of things and not their form. In this world, forms obscure the realities that lie within them, but in the hereafter, forms will conform to realities, and the latter will prevail. For this reason, every individual will be resurrected according to his own spiritual reality. The slanderer will be resurrected in the form of a vicious dog, the greedy as a wild wolf, the haughty as a tiger, and the ambitious as a lion. Traditions have attested to this, and men of insight and discernment have testified to it. You might say that many students of bad character have sought and acquired knowledge of the sciences. That may be so, but how far they are from real knowledge which is useful in the hereafter, and which ensures happiness. Characteristic of that true knowledge is that even a rudimentary grasp of it would show that sin is a fatal and destructive poison. And have you ever seen anyone take anything which he knew to be fatally poisonous? As to what you hear from the sophists, It is nothing but spurious traditions which they fabricate and repeat. It is no science at all. Ibn Masudi said, "Knowledge is not the prolific retention of traditions but a light which floods the heart." Others, having in mind the words of God, "Such only of his servants as are possessed of knowledge fear God," hold that knowledge is the fear of God. This verse evidently alludes to the choicest fruit of knowledge, and for that reason, one of the scholars said that the meaning of the words, "We sought knowledge for purposes other than the glory of God but failed to grasp it, and it remained the attribute of God alone," is that knowledge resisted our efforts to grasp it, and consequently its truth was not revealed to us. All we acquired was its words and terms. Should you say that several well-learned men in jurisprudence, while characterized by blameworthy traits from which they never purified themselves, have excelled in the principles of law and applied jurisprudence, and have been considered authorities thereon? My answer would be that if you had known the relative ranks of the sciences as well as the value of the science of the hereafter, you would have realized that the sciences to which they have addressed themselves are of little avail as knowledge, but are of use merely as works provided they are sought as means with which to draw near to God. This last point has already been mentioned and will again be discussed. The second duty of the student. The second duty of the student is to reduce to a minimum his ties with the affairs of the world and leave his kin and country, because such ties occupy one's time and divert one's attention. Furthermore, God has not given man two hearts, and the more the mind divides its attention among several things, the less able it is to comprehend the truth. For this reason, it has been said, "Knowledge will surrender nothing to man unless man surrenders his all to it." Even when you devote yourself completely to it, you cannot be sure that you will attain any of it. This divided mind is like a stream whose waters flow in several directions, only to be absorbed partly by the earth and partly by the air, leaving nothing for the irrigation of planted lands. The third duty of the student. The third duty of the student is that he should neither scorn knowledge nor exalt himself over the teacher. Instead, he should entrust the teacher with the conduct of his affairs and submit to his advice, just as a simple patient would submit to a sympathetic and clever physician. He should humble himself before his teacher and seek reward and honor through service to him. It is related by al-Shabi that once, as Zayd ibn Thabit was leaving a funeral service at which he had just officiated, his mule was brought to him. As he was about to mount it, Ibn Abbas rushed forward and held the stirrup for him. Zayd said, "Oh, no! Bother not thyself, O cousin of the Apostle of God." Ibn Abbas replied, "Thus have we been charged to treat the learned and the illustrious." To which Zayd, bending over and kissing Ibn Abbas's hand, replied, "Thus have we been charged to venerate the household of our Prophet." The Prophet also said, "It is not the habit of the believer to flatter anyone except when he is seeking knowledge. Therefore, the seeker of knowledge should not lord it over his teacher." One manifestation of such pride is the student's reluctance to heed the advice of anyone except popular and well-known teachers. This is sheer foolishness, as knowledge is the way to salvation and happiness. One who seeks escape from a wild lion does not mind whether he is saved by a celebrity or an obscure person, as long as he is led to safety. The torments of hellfire inflicted on those ignorant of God are greater than any a lion can inflict. Wisdom, therefore, is the aim of every believer. He seizes it wherever he finds it, and is obligated to anyone who imparts it to him, no matter who that person may be. For this reason, it has been said, "Knowledge humbles the haughty youth, as the flood washes away the hill." Knowledge is not attained except through humility and attentiveness. God said, "Lo! Herein is warning for him who hath a heart, or hearkeneth with his ear while he himself is an eyewitness." By him who hath a heart is meant the person prepared and capable of understanding knowledge but who fails unless he opens his ears and heart, receiving knowledge attentively, humbly, and thankfully. Let the pupil, therefore, be to his teacher like soft soil that completely absorbs heavy rains. Whatever the teacher recommends, the pupil should follow, putting aside his own opinion. The teacher's faults are often more beneficial than the pupil's correct judgments because experience reveals truths that might initially seem strange but are profoundly useful. This principle is illustrated in the story of Al-Khidr and Moses, where Al-Khidr told Moses, Verily, thou canst not have patience with me. How canst thou be patient in matters the meaning of which thou comprehendest not? Al-Qaeda allowed Moses to follow him only on the condition that Moses would maintain silence and ask no questions until Al-Qaeda himself provided an explanation. However, Moses could not restrain himself, leading to their parting of ways. In short, any student who clings stubbornly to his own opinions and defies his teacher's guidance is doomed to disappointment. If one objects that God says, "Ask the people of the reminder if you do not know," and claims that asking questions is ordained, remember that this applies only to questions the teacher permits. Asking about matters beyond the student's current understanding is blameworthy, as illustrated by Al-Qaeda forbidding Moses from asking questions prematurely. The fourth duty of the student. The fourth duty is that the student should, at first, pay no attention to the numerous differences of opinion among people, whether in secular sciences or in the sciences of the hereafter. Such differences can confuse the mind, dampen enthusiasm, and lead to despair about learning. Instead, the student should first master the single, praiseworthy path taught by his teacher before attending to other schools of thought. The novice must avoid questionable ideas, much like a new Muslim should be shielded from the influence of unbelievers. Only the experienced should engage with conflicting opinions, much like the strong in faith can interact with unbelievers without harm. For the faint-hearted to imitate the strong is a grave error. The fifth duty is that the seeker of knowledge should not allow any branch or kind of praiseworthy knowledge to escape him without carefully examining it to become familiar with its aims and purposes. If time permits, he should study it in detail. Otherwise, he should focus on mastering the most important while acquainting himself with the rest. This is because the different branches of knowledge are both supplementary to one another and closely interrelated. Moreover, one immediate benefit of such acquaintance is that the student will no longer persist in hostility toward branches of knowledge other than his own, a hostility born of ignorance, as men are often enemies of what they do not know. God said, "And not having submitted to guidance, they proceed to say, it is an age-old lie." The poet said, "Fresh water in the mouth of the sick seems bitter." Knowledge, whether lower or higher, either leads men to God or helps them a little on their way. In this respect, it is classified according to its ability to draw them nearer to their goal, namely God, or how far it can send them away from that goal. Those who pursue these branches of knowledge are like guards patrolling the frontiers and outposts. Each has his rank, and according to that rank, he has a reward in the hereafter, provided he seeks the face of God. The sixth duty is that the student should not address himself to every branch of knowledge simultaneously. Instead, he should observe a logical order, beginning with the most important, especially since life is ordinarily too short to pursue all branches of knowledge. It is, therefore, wise to acquire the best of everything, satisfying oneself with merely tasting some branches while directing one's full efforts toward mastering the noblest of all sciences, the science of the hereafter, including the science of practical religion and the science of revelation. The goal of the science of practical religion is revelation, and the goal of revelation is to know God. By this, I do not mean the creed passed down by parents or the systematic defenses of theologians against adversaries. Instead, I mean a form of conviction born of divine light that floods the heart of one who, through self-purification and self-mortification, has cleansed their soul from impurities. Such a state brings one to the level of faith exemplified by Abu Bakr, whose faith, as testified by the Lord of creation, outweighed that of the entire world. It is doubtful that the systematic belief crafted by theologians, known as the science of words, kalam, could surpass the understanding of Umar, Uthman, Ali, and the rest of the companions. Yet Abu Bakr excelled them all due to the secret knowledge he bore in his heart. Strange is the person who, having heard similar sayings from the Prophet, dismisses them as Sufi drivel or unreasonable. Be cautious, lest you lose your spiritual capital. Strive instead to uncover the secret, which cannot be found in the tools of jurisprudence and theologians, but is only attainable through diligent effort. In short, the noblest and highest of all sciences is the knowledge of God. This science is a boundless sea, and its depths cannot be measured. The highest ranks in this science belong to the prophets, followed by the saints, and then by their followers. It has been narrated that the portraits of two ancient wise men were seen on the wall of a certain mosque. In one portrait, one wise man held a scroll with the inscription, "When you have done everything well, think not that you have fulfilled all until you have come to know God and to understand that He is the cause of all causes and the creator of all things." In the other portrait, the second wise man held a scroll that read, "Before I knew God, I was wont to drink and thirst again, but when I came to know Him, my thirst was quenched without any drinking." The seventh duty is that no one should delve into one branch of knowledge before mastering the branch that precedes it, as sciences are inherently sequential, with one branch preparing for and leading into another. Success is attainable only by observing this order. God said, "Those to whom we have given the book, they recite it as it ought to be recited." In every branch of knowledge the student pursues, their aim should always point higher. Nor should they dismiss a science as useless merely because its proponents disagree, or because some err in its practice, or because some violate its principles. For example, some reject philosophy and theology because they find faults among their practitioners. Others discredit medicine due to a physician's error or accept astrology due to a single accurate prediction while dismissing it for errors elsewhere. All these judgments are misguided. Each case must be evaluated on its own merits, as not every individual can master every science independently. For this reason Ali said, "Accept no truth because of the men who hold it, but first find the truth, and you shall know who its real proponents are." The eighth duty is to know how to ascertain the noble nature of this or the other science. By this is meant two things: the nobility of its fruit and the authenticity of its principles. Take, for example, the sciences of religion and medicine. The fruit of the former is eternal life, and the fruit of the latter is the physical life. Consequently, the science of religion is the nobler. Or again, consider the sciences of arithmetic and astrology. The former is the nobler because of the firmer and more authentic foundations of its principles. On the other hand, if arithmetic should be compared with medicine, the latter would be nobler with respect to its fruit, while with respect to its principles, arithmetic would be nobler. The fruit, however, has the priority. For this reason, medicine, although mostly guesswork, is nobler. Similarly, it becomes evident that the noblest of all sciences is the science of knowing God, His angels, books, and apostles, as well as knowing the path that leads to these sciences. Seek, therefore, nothing else and treasure nothing besides. The ninth duty is that the student's purpose should, at the outset, be the adornment and beautification of his inner self with virtue, and ultimately, nearness to God and ascent to the neighborhood of the heavenly hosts, the angels and the cherubim. His aim should not be the attainment of authority or influence, nor contention with foolish men, nor boasting before his peers. But if his aim is to draw near to God, he would inevitably seek that which is closest to it, namely, the science of the hereafter. Nevertheless, he should not look with contempt upon the other sciences, such as the sciences of jurisprudence, syntax, and grammar, which are connected with the Quran and the Sunnah, and other sciences like those already mentioned in connection with the auxiliary and supplementary sciences discussed under those sciences, the acquisition of which is fard kifaya, a collective obligation. You should not, however, gather from our enthusiastic praise of the science of the hereafter that we seek to disparage the other sciences. On the contrary, those who have undertaken to study them are like those who have undertaken to guard the outposts of Islam where they are encamped, or like the conquerors warring on behalf of God. Of them, some are active fighters, others are on reserve, others are in charge of the water supply, while others look after the mounts. But all will receive their reward if their aim is the glory of the word of God rather than the possession of spoils. God said, "God will raise those of you who believe, and those to whom knowledge has been given, to loftier ranks." And again, referring to those who have followed His good pleasure, "There are varying grades with God. Virtue is relative, and our scorn for the money changers when we compare them with royalty does not mean that they are contemptible when compared with street cleaners. Do not think, therefore, that whatever falls short of the highest rank is worthless. The highest rank belongs to the prophets, followed by the saints, then the learned men well versed in knowledge, and finally the righteous, according to their ranks. In short, Whosoever shall have wrought an atom's weight of good shall behold it, and whosoever shall have wrought an atom's weight of evil shall behold it. Whosoever seeks God through knowledge, no matter what kind, is sure to profit and advance. The 10th duty of the student is that he should know the relation of the different sciences to the goal so that he might not attach more importance to nearby, inconsequential matters than to remote but significant ones. The word, important, signifies anything that is of import to you, and nothing is of any import save your fate in this world and the next. But since, as said in the Quran and attested by insight and experience, it is not possible to enjoy both the pleasures of this world and the bliss of the next, it is more important to concern oneself with those things which will endure forever. Then this world will become a temporary abode, the body a vehicle, and works the power that will propel it to the goal. Furthermore, there is no goal except meeting God, and despite the fact that very few in this world realize its significance, in its achievement lies all bliss.